Shalom everybody, Shavua Tov. We are continuing with where we left off in Rav Noson's discourse in Likutey Halakhot, section Orach Chaim, the laws of Nefilat Apayim, falling on one's face, discourse number 4. We're now beginning paragraph number 20. At this point, Rav Noson is going to go into something which is very, very deep in the Kabbalah and in Rabbi Nachman's teachings and in the Zohar, and in the Midrash and in the Gemara regarding what's called Kitrug Hayareach, the prosecution of the moon. For this we need to explain some introductory details. We see in the Chumash, Parshat Bereshit, right, that Hashem initially created both bodies of light, which are the sun and the moon, equal. Right? Let's take a look at the verse. The verse is in chapter 1 of Genesis, Bereshit, verse number 16. It says, Vaya'as Elokim et shnei ha'me'orot hagdolim. And the Lord, Hashem, made the two big lights, me'orot, shining lights. And then right after that, it says, after saying the two big lights, it says, Et ha'ma'or hagadol le'memshelet hayom, the big light to rule over the day, of the time span that Hashem created as a day, the unit of the day. So the day of the day is ruled by the bigger light, and the smaller light, the memshelet halayla, to rule at night. And then it says and then the stars. So the question that everybody asks, and especially in the Gemara, is what's going on? You just said at the beginning of the verse, the two big lights, and then you say, and the big light to rule over the day, and the small light to rule over the night. But wait a second, you just said there were two big lights. So Rashi brings from the Gemara's Chulin, page 60b, says clearly that once the spiritual energy of the moon saw this situation, that they're both shining equally. There's also different opinions what is meant to be shining equally. We won't go into the details so much, but that the moon was shining totally, full scale. There's no waxing of the moon to be diminished. It was full light. Some say it was as equal light, shining as bright as the sun. So that means there was no night. But the verse says clearly that afterwards to rule the night. Let's say there's different opinions basically. Some say it was as full force as the sun, and some say that the moon was shining completely, like on the 15th of every month today, was shining completely with the light of the sun shining into it. So the moon complained to the energy, the angel, the force behind the moon, complained to Hashem, what's going on? Rashi brings down the Gemara. אי אפשר לשני מלאכים להשתמש בכתר אחד. אי אפשר לשני מלאכים שישתמשו בכתר אחד. I'm a king because I'm shining. The goal is to shine light, so we're considered like a king. The sun is also a king. We can't both shine using the same crown. We're using the same crown and we're both shining with that same light. It doesn't make sense. So Hashem says, you're right, diminish yourself. So the Gemara goes on in Chulin. So the moon said to Hashem, the energy behind the moon, the spiritual energy behind the moon said to Hashem, because I said something which makes sense, I get diminished. So Hashem says, you're right, so I'll give you to appease you, the stars. That's what the verse says right after this, and the stars, with the night, with the rulership of the moon at night, Hashem gave it to appease it stars. She wasn't appeased. The Gemara brings every time an argument. And then Hashem said, okay, the Jewish people will count the festivals, the months, based on you. She complained about that also. It doesn't make sense because you still have the year, which is based on the solar system, the solar calendar. And then the Hashem said, okay, the biggest tzaddikim will be named after you. Yaakov the small, David the small, Shmuel HaKatan. She wasn't appeased. So Hashem said, okay, you're right. So every Rosh Chodesh, the Jewish people will bring on my behalf a sin offering, Chatat Lashem. That's what we read on the Parsha, read every Rosh Chodesh, Chatat Lashem. And the commentaries say The Gemara says, "Havi olai kapara al shemi'atiti et hayareach." The Jewish people bring upon me an atonement. Hashem says, "Bring for me as if an atonement, in that I diminished the moon." There's a lot of depth in this thing, but basically, this is the kichug hayareach. Okay, this is the prosecution argument of the moon. She said something right, and she's diminished. So what's going on here? You know, Hashem said originally the two big lights. It's like there was a built-in flaw, and Hashem was waiting for someone to make the move. Or the sun, or the moon. The moon was the one who made the move to complain. There's something wrong here. We can't use the same light. You know why? Because they understood already that there has to be a diminishment. If it's just full light the whole time, and there's no waning in the experience of creation, that is just light. All day light, all night light. So there's no darkness and night part of life. So you don't appreciate the light. So Hashem was waiting for someone to make that statement. Okay? Why? In order for the built-in flaw should be recognized, and then the one who recognizes it should be diminished. That still doesn't make sense. And then Hashem says the Jewish people, every Rosh Chodesh, they will be offering an atonement of Rosh Chodesh to atone for me what I did, and this should be as an appeasing for the moon. Still not understood. Fine. But the depth of this point is that there's something which can't be understood. Hashem, why did you do that in the first place? So if Nosson says, where we're holding, that this idea of Shabbat Para, which we read right, after Purim, and then after Shabbat Para, we read Parashat HaChodesh. Parashat HaChodesh is a result of Shabbat Para. If you recall, to recap, we said Parashat Para, which means on a practical level, every year when the Jewish people on the Shabbat after Purim recite Parashat Para, you get a foretaste of the purity of the red heifer, which is what? To accept, even when things don't make sense, like the red heifer itself, the ashes of the red heifer, that it made pure the impure, and it made pure the impure. It made impure the pure and pure the impure, and it's in one idea. The exact same ashes made the Kohanim, making them impure, rendered them impure, but when sprinkled, it makes those who are very impure with contact of dead corpses to make them pure, so they can enter the Beit HaMikdash and partake of the sacrifices. So the Parshat Para till today sprinkles upon us this contradiction, and yet we accept it with emunah. So Shabbat Para, which is the result, as we said, of the Simcha of Purim, the Simcha of Purim leads to that a person is so happy with Hashem that even if things don't make sense, I'm in. I use my emunah mode to accept what Hashem is doing with me in my life. That's the idea. When there's contradictions in what you're doing, you're trying to be a firm Jew, you're trying to serve Hashem the mitzvot, and yet you get smacked in the face, you feel setbacks and everything, and you begin to wonder, what am I doing wrong? I'm trying to do good things. To accept all that's happening, to believe that even though it doesn't make sense, I'm still in the ball game, that's emunah, that comes from the Shabbat Para. With that, you have the ability for the following Shabbat, which is the Shabbat preceding the month of Nisan, which is considered the first, month of the year. Shabbat HaChodesh is we accept now we're able to fix the Kitrug HaYareach. Okay? So meaning, it's a contradiction here, can't be resolved, doesn't make sense. You made two big lights and then you diminish, and then Kitrug HaYareach, she said something right, and you diminish her. Yeah, she said that the moon said to Hashem, I say something which makes sense, that two lights can't rule the same crown, and I get diminished. Hashem says, you're right. So if I'm right, undo it. No, it has to stay this way now. This is how it has to. So it's a contradiction. It's two things that doesn't make sense. This is the power of the Jewish people, where the Parsha, take a look at the Parshat HaChodesh, where we read on the Shabbat, Parshat HaChodesh, is from the Parshat Bo, in the book of Shemot. Okay? The Parshat HaChodesh, just the opening, like two verses. The second verse talks about the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, And then the rest of the parsha that we read talks about preparing the Korban Pesach in Egypt. The Jews' actual preparation on Rosh Chodesh. You have to get ready an animal to sacrifice as the Pesach offering. On the 10th of Nisan, you have to check it to make sure there's no blemishes. For 4 days, it has to be kept and preserved, that it doesn't get injured or whatever. And then you sacrifice it on the 14th of Nisan. But the parsha starts there. Let's take a look also. Parshat Bo, the book of Shemot, chapter 12, verse 2. HaChodesh hazeh lachem. This month, hazeh. So the Rashi brings down the drush that Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu towards the end of the day of Erev Rosh Chodesh. That means the last day of Adar, the month of Adar. Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu, you see, when the moon is like this, sanctified. And right at that point, when Hashem said that to Moshe Rabbeinu, it became Shkia. And at the point of Shkia, you can begin to see the moon. So Hashem says, when the moon is like this, just a tiny spark, as like a hair's breadth, then you sanctify the new moon. For any of the 12 months of the year, this is how it has to be. So it's learned out in this parsha, which was at the time in Egypt. Okay? This is how you sanctify the moon, not just for the month of Nisan, but for all the months. So even though the bulk of what we read on Shabbat HaChodesh talks about preparing the Korban Pesach, in our context, in our concern, it's called Shabbat HaChodesh because we learn out the completion of the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon from the Parsha Din of the Korban Pesach. We're going to go into this, but basically it's showing that because the Jews were involved in this mitzvah of the Korban Pesach with joy is a factor for a person to be able to fix the blemish of the moon. To explain, Rav Nosson is going to explain now, that when the Jewish people every month do what's called Kiddush Levanah, we do Birkat Levanah, blessing the new moon, sanctifying the new moon, this assists in sanctifying and rectifying the blemish of the moon. That's why we read the Shabbat HaChodesh right after Para, showing that now that we've accepted that when it's opposites, I'm able to deal with it with Emunah, so you have the ability to fix the moon. The blemish of the moon, the Kichuga Yareach, where the moon said, doesn't make sense. Two kings using the same crown, it can't be like that, Hashem. And okay, you're right, diminish. And then she says, but I said something right. Okay, who's going to come and fix this scenario? That's something that doesn't make sense. And more doesn't make sense that the person, the item, the entity, the moon, who made a point which makes sense, she's not fixed. So the Jewish people will complete it. That's what Rav Nosson is going to say now. Take a look. Now let's for all this introduction, we'll better understand what Rav Nosson is going to say now. So Rav Nosson says like this. V'chakach, again, section number 20. V'chakach, after Shabbat Para, Korin Parshat HaChodesh. We read the parsha dealing with the laws of the new moon, sanctifying the new moon, and the month of Nisan, the devotions of the month of Nisan. Ki kol ze hu sod Kiddush HaChodesh. Everything we mentioned now about Shabbat Para, being able to accept contradictions with Emunah and Simcha. Simcha is the prerequisite to the Emunah, to accept things that don't make sense in life. All this is the whole idea of sanctifying the new moon. Whether it was at the time of the Beit HaMikdash that the witnesses had to come and see the new moon. I saw the moon like this, and the Beit Din declares, okay, Mekudash. We sanctify the new moon. Sanctifying the moon is now we're trying to help the moon to reach now its completion again. So in other words, the Jewish people, by sanctifying the new moon, when the moon begins to become a crescent, a little line, a hair's breadth, and then starts to grow until the middle of the month, we need the Jewish people to sanctify it. It's not enough that it's happening by itself, that the moon and its positioning with the earth, because the idea how the moon has light and has diminished light is dependent on the positioning of the interference of the earth between the sun and the moon. The sun is shining its light to the moon still, but the earth interferes, and there's a movement of the cycle that it's moving a little, so that's what causes the waning, the waxing of the moon, and it's growing. It's waning and growing. So even though it's happening technically unassisted by itself, Hashem requires the Jewish people to sanctify it. So we don't have the Beit Din today. We have every month Kiddush HaChodesh, Kiddush Levanah, that we say, Am Yisrael says, after a certain amount where the light is apparent, we sanctify, we say a bracha, blessing the new moon, okay? This is the whole idea, like he's saying, of sanctifying the moon. Shehi bechinat tikun halevana mepigimata. What we're doing today, in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in sanctifying the new moon, is to rectify the moon from its blemish, like we said. Kichama ulevana shavim nivreu. Because like we said earlier, from the Gemara, Schulin, sun and moon were created equal. Como shekatuv, like the verse we saw in Genesis Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 16. Et shnei hameorot hagdolim. Hashem created the two big lights initially. Uchmo shamur b'otenu zan, like our sages explained on this verse in Chulin, page 60b, right? That they were diminished afterwards, like the complaint of the moon. Ach alidei kichug hayareach shamra. This is from the Gemara there. However, through the prosecution of the moon, that she said to God, to Hashem, wait a second, it's impossible for two kings to use one crown. Doesn't make sense. You have one shining light, one king. You can't have two kings. We're both now, our mission is to shine. So it doesn't make sense that two entities are doing the job. Okay, even in separate times, there has to be one doing this. And if there's supposed to be night, so it can't be. There has to be a diminishment. You want darkness in creation, Hashem. So how can it be now? Okay? So that was the prosecution. And then Hashem said, okay, diminish. And she said, I said something right and you diminish me. That's the kichu. The prosecution is that point where she said, Hashem, I said something right and you're punishing me for saying something right. Which means that it doesn't make sense. Yet it's the will of Hashem, but it doesn't make sense. Okay? So we're fixing it now. Hashem left room for this to happen, so the Jewish people should be the ones fixing this in every month, sanctifying the moon. Okay? Through its prosecution, it was diminished. Okay, like we said. And now through us doing the mitzvah of sanctifying the month, the new month, which is learned out of the Parshat Bo that we saw, and that's what we read on the Shabbat preceding the month of Nisan every year. Through this, to the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, whether it's in the time of the temple of the witnesses, testimony of the witnesses, etc., and the Beit Din saying Mekudash, Mekudash, or whether it's today during the Birkat Levanah, where by doing so, we're involved in rectifying the moon from its blemish, the Pigimat, to fill up the blemish of the moon by us sanctifying it. Our ability to do that Hashem gave over to us to sanctify the new moon. Again, even though it's happening scientifically by itself, we need to sanctify it so it has a resonation of being called, the month begins on this day because of the positioning of the moon. Today is the first day of the month. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, today, because that's us doing the job there, okay? And it's all drawn from what was mentioned on Parshat Parah. Two opposites in one. Dahainu, Rav Nosson explains. In other words, such a person who merits the perception of two opposites that are really one and they function together and they're both needed even though they're two opposites. Through the running, the concept in Judaism that you pursue in perception, you understand. And then there's the ma'akev. Hey, whoa, take it easy. You're pushed back into darkness, into confusion, into not understanding, and you have to go into amuna mode. So it's two things needed. You would think just advance, more knowledge, more understanding, more depth. No, we put a brakes. You have to stop. 1 second, let me understand. No, redifa and ma'akev, running and then being restrained. They're two. They work together. That you can't understand, but they work together. Okay. Bivchinat mate velo mate, which is the same concept that the Zohar mentions, the terminology of the Zohar, reaching, mate, velo mate, and not reaching. And you need both. And they both work together, and they both really are one, which you can't understand. How could running forward and then being pushed back be unified? It's two opposite directions totally, and yet they're one. How do I accept it? Emunah. Shezeu bechinat, that this is Rav Nosson is using the terms from Likutey Moharan lesson 24. Shezeu bechinat, this is the idea that Rabbi Nachman quotes a lot. Tachlit hayediah shelo neda kanizkar le'el. This is the concept of the goal of knowing is to know that you don't know. Unbelievable. The more you know of Torah, the more you try to understand and learn the ways of Hashem, the more you see how much you don't know. You open up a new dimension. Oh my God, I thought I understood everything, and I see I don't know anything. That's the idea. That's all these ideas are connected. Then the goal of learning of Torah is just to open you up to higher levels of how much you don't know, and therefore higher levels of how much you have to turn to Emunah in order to survive, in order to continue in your Yiddishkeit, in your life, in your pursuit of coming close to Hashem. You need greater Emunah, and that's thanks to you advancing in knowledge. It just opens you up to higher levels. You say, I don't know anything now. I just opened a brand new room, and I'm at the beginning, at the bottom of the new chamber here, so I know nothing right now. And that's the goal. Tachlit hayediah shelo neda. Rav Nosson says there are also two opposites in one. The goal of knowledge, just understanding, is to know that you don't know. What in the world? So such a person now who's involved in this, which is the ideal scenario of every Jew in the world, but ultimately it's the tzaddikim who reach this level at a high level of perfection. Such a person, which is the Jewish people, he has the merit to fill up the blemish of the moon, which has been diminished. We're the ones who are able to fill it up to reach the 15th of the month, where it's a full moon. Kiddush Levanah, and that's the idea of sanctifying the month, as mentioned above. So Rav Nosson shows us that the month of Shabbat, the Shabbat Parsha Chodesh, is a result of Shabbat Parah, and both are needed to be able to do Pesach properly. And then once you have all these factors, it shines for the rest of life, the rest of the year, this ability to take two opposites and deal with them and accept them with joy, with emunah, and by this advancing B'ezrat Hashem. So we'll continue with the next class, God willing, on this topic. And like I always say, if you want to just say hello or feedback on this class, please reach out to me, preferably by WhatsApp, private message only, 732-800-1863. It's an American number, so it's +1 732-800-1863, or by email, Breslov Therapy, BRESLOV Therapy @gmail.com. Thank you. Have an amazing, amazing week. Shalom, shalom.